The morning started quietly, with the sky still pale and soft as the sun tried to rise behind the light clouds. The road outside the small town was almost empty, the kind of calm highway where cars moved slowly and rarely made any noise. It was the kind of day where nothing dramatic was expected, and everything felt almost too peaceful to imagine anything unusual happening. "Officer," Daniel was driving slowly along the main stretch, doing what he did every day. He was used to the routine. He knew every turn, every sign, every little store on the side of the road. Some days he saw familiar faces through car windows, people heading to work or school. Other days he saw strangers passing through, and he wondered briefly about their lives before returning to his duties. He didn't expect anything different from the morning ahead of him. As he drove, he noticed a silver car a few meters ahead. There was nothing strange about it at first. Not old, not new. Just an ordinary car, like so many others. But as he watched a little more closely, he saw it shift slightly in the lane. Not enough to call it swerving, not enough to suggest danger, but enough to catch his attention. He kept watching for another minute. Again the car drifted a few inches toward the line and then corrected gently. He took a breath and leaned forward a little. Many things could make a person do that: a phone call, adjusting the radio, reaching for something. But sometimes it was something more serious, like tiredness or distraction. And as part of his job, he had to check. He didn't like pulling people over for small things. He wasn't the kind of officer who searched for mistakes or waited for someone to slip up, but he believed in safety, and if a simple check could prevent something worse, felt it was worth doing. The silver car drifted once more, just a little, and Daniel made his decision. He turned on his signal, slowed down, and then switched on his lights. The blue glow reflected softly on the back of the car as the driver responded almost right away. The silver car slowed down calmly and pulled to the side of the road. Daniel parked behind it and took a moment before getting out. He always paused for that 1 second. It gave him time to settle his thoughts and make sure he approached with a clear mind. He didn't like appearing rushed or tense. People often got nervous during these stops, and he didn't want anyone to feel fear or confusion. When he stepped out of his car, the breeze brushed across his face. The morning air was cool, and it carried the faint smell of grass and distant coffee from a nearby diner. He walked toward the silver car, noticing the driver's silhouette inside. The man's shoulders looked tired, almost heavy. As he reached the window, the driver rolled it down slowly. The man inside looked to be in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. He had kind eyes, but tired ones, like he had been awake far longer than he should have been. "Good morning," Daniel said gently, not wanting to startle him. "I'm just checking in because I noticed your car drifting a little. Everything okay?" The older man nodded, though it was clear he had pushed himself to respond calmly. "Yes, officer. I'm fine. Just a long night." Daniel gave a small nod. He had heard that answer many times before, but something about this man's voice sounded different. It wasn't careless or dismissing. It carried weight. "I understand," Daniel replied, keeping his tone respectful. "Do you have your license and registration with you?" The man reached slowly toward the glove compartment, but his hands shook slightly. Not out of fear, it looked more like exhaustion. Daniel paid attention to every movement, not because he suspected danger, but because he wanted to be sure the man didn't struggle more than he needed to. When the man finally handed over the documents, Daniel noticed how his eyes drifted down as if he barely had the strength to keep them open. "Thank you," Daniel said softly. "You look pretty tired. Are you heading home?" The man nodded again, slowly. "Yes, I've been out all night. I shouldn't have driven, I suppose. But I didn't want to bother anyone." Daniel felt a small tug of concern. The man's voice held honesty, and that honesty made Daniel more curious. "Did something happen?" he asked carefully. The older man gave a faint smile, not a happy one, but a tired one. "Not anything bad. Just a long night helping out." Before Daniel could ask what he meant, a car slowed behind them on the road. Someone inside leaned slightly out of their window, holding up a phone. Daniel didn't think much of it at first. People recorded everything these days. Sometimes they expected drama, even when none existed. Daniel chose to ignore the recording, keep his focus where it belonged, than the man in front of him. "All right," he said after a short pause. "Let me run this information, and I'll be right back." The man nodded again, his head lowering a little as though gravity pulled on it more than usual. Daniel walked back to his patrol car, holding the documents gently. He didn't want to assume anything. The man didn't seem dangerous. He didn't seem confused or uncooperative. He seemed simply worn out. When he sat down behind the computer, he typed in the man's information. The screen loaded slowly as usual, taking its time. While he waited, Daniel glanced at the silver car again. The older man's shoulders didn't move much. He sat still, like someone who had reached the end of his energy. The results appeared on the screen. Everything looked normal. No warnings, no issues. But something in the registration caught Daniel's eye. There was a small symbol next to the name of the car's owner. A symbol Daniel recognized. It belonged to a community shelter he had seen around town, a small place that provided food, blankets, and help to people who had nowhere to go on cold nights. Daniel remembered hearing stories about how the shelter kept its doors open late during the winter, offering warmth to anyone who needed it. He looked at the silver car again and thought about the older man's tired eyes and soft voice. He wondered if maybe the long night the man mentioned wasn't just a personal problem. Maybe it had something to do with the shelter. Before getting out of his car, Daniel rested his arms on the steering wheel, thinking carefully. He believed in treating people fairly, but he also believed in understanding them. Sometimes a simple question led to a truth that changed the whole situation. He stepped out once more and walked back toward the silver car. He didn't rush. He didn't let the small crowd forming in the distance distract him. A few cars had pulled over farther down the road. People stayed inside but watched. A couple of phones pointed in his direction. Daniel didn't like being recorded, but he had learned long ago not to let it affect how he acted. When he reached the window again, he returned the documents. "Everything checks out," he said calmly. "But I noticed something on your registration. Are you connected to the shelter in town?" The older man lifted his eyes slowly. For a moment, he looked surprised that the symbol had been noticed. Then he gave a soft nod. "Yes," he said quietly. "I spend most nights there when the weather is cold. Last night was a long one. A lot of people needed help." Something in the way he said it told Daniel the story was deeper than that. Not dramatic, not dangerous, but meaningful. "You volunteer there?" Daniel asked. The man shook his head faintly. "Not just volunteer. I've been running it for many years now, but I don't talk about it much. I just try to do what I can." Daniel felt the words settle inside him. It didn't change his duty. It changed how he saw the moment. He looked at the man's tired hands resting on the steering wheel. He looked at the gentle, almost humble expression on his face, and he realized this wasn't a man who had been reckless. This was a man who had pushed himself for the sake of others, until his body could barely keep up. Daniel let a long breath out. The story wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive or confrontational, but it was human. It was real, and neither he nor the people recording knew yet that this small moment, just a simple roadside stop between two tired men, would soon become something much bigger. The morning grew a little brighter as time passed, but the quiet road still felt calm, almost too calm for what was quietly building. The silver car remained parked along the shoulder, and the older man stayed seated inside, trying to gather some strength. He rubbed his eyes slowly, the kind of motion people make when they've been awake longer than their body can handle. The cool air drifted through the open window, brushing lightly against his face and helping him stay awake. Officer Daniel stood nearby, not rushing back to his patrol car this time. Something about the way the man spoke earlier stayed with him. There was a softness in the man's voice that didn't match most of the situations Daniel dealt with during roadside stops. There was no anger, no frustration, no attempt to avoid the conversation. There was only exhaustion, a deep, sincere tiredness that spoke of effort, not neglect. In the distance, a few cars continued to slow as they passed. People had grown used to recording police stops, expecting tension or conflict. Phones were held up through windows, and Daniel could feel the faint weight of their attention. He didn't like being watched this way, not because he planned to do anything wrong, but because he wanted the interaction to stay calm and simple. Cameras often added pressure. Pressure sometimes made moments heavier than they needed to be. He took a step closer to the silver car again, leaning slightly so he could speak without raising his voice. "Sir, if you're comfortable, could you tell me a little more about your night?" Daniel asked. "You seem really tired. I just want to make sure you're all right." The older man looked up with a gentle blink, like he had been pulled out of a quiet thought. He took a breath before answering. "Last night the temperature dropped lower than expected," he said softly. "When that happens, we keep the shelter open much later. Some people don't have a warm place to go. We try to give them blankets, warm meals, a safe spot to rest, ... His words trailed off for a moment as he looked down at his hands. "Remembering the long hours, we had more people than usual," he added after a pause. "I stayed until almost sunrise. We didn't want to turn anyone away." Daniel listened quietly, letting each word sink in. There was no bragging in the man's voice, no sense of showing off or seeking praise. He spoke simply, like someone telling the truth, because it was the only thing to say. "That's a lot of responsibility to carry alone," Daniel replied. The man gave a faint smile, the kind that only lifts a corner of the mouth. "I'm not alone," he said softly. "There are others who help, but sometimes they have families or jobs. I've been doing this for so long that I'm used to staying late. I just didn't realize how tired I was until I got on the road."
All night.
Daniel nodded. The honesty in those words hit him gently, like a small reminder of how many people in the world quietly did good work without being noticed. In the distance, another car slowed down. The person inside leaned forward to get a better look. It made Daniel shift a little, though he kept his tone steady. "Let me ask you something," Daniel said. "Did you get any sleep at all before you drove?" The man shook his head slowly. "Not really. I thought I could make it home before I felt too tired, but ... He paused and let out a long breath. "I guess I misjudged it." Daniel studied him carefully. Driving while tired wasn't illegal the same way other actions were, but it was still dangerous. People reacted slower, their attention drifted, and mistakes happened without warning. Daniel thought about what could have happened if the road had been busier or if the man had drifted a little farther. But he also thought about the night the man had described. The people who needed help, the shelter that stayed warm because of him. It wasn't carelessness. It was compassion. And compassion often came with a heavy cost. Daniel stepped back from the car for a moment, needing a breath of distance to sort his thoughts. He looked at the road, the thin line of passing cars, the stretch of quiet pavement, the open space where the sunlight finally broke through the clouds. When he turned back, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small sticker was on the corner of the rear window, another symbol of the shelter. But this one included a slogan, "Everyone deserves warmth." Daniel felt something shift inside him. There was a reason he had joined the police force. It wasn't for control or authority. It was to help. To be the person who protected, who cared when something felt wrong, who stepped in when others couldn't. He didn't always get the chance to do that the way he imagined when he first started. But moments like this, they reminded him who he wanted to be. He returned to the window again. "Sir," said gently, "I'm not going to give you a ticket, but I do want to make sure you're safe to drive. You seem like you're on the edge of falling asleep." The older man sighed, not out of frustration, but relief. "I appreciate that," he said. "I don't want to cause trouble. I just wanted to get home." Daniel looked over the quiet road and then back at him. "Do you have someone who can come pick you up?" he asked. The man hesitated. "No," he admitted softly. "I live alone." Daniel pressed his lips together thoughtfully. He didn't want to leave the man alone, not in that state. He didn't want to force him into something either. He simply wanted the man to reach home safely, if you're all right with it. "I can follow you the rest of the way," Daniel offered. "That way I know you'll get home without trouble." The older man blinked slowly, taken aback. No officer had offered him something like that before. "You'd do that?" he asked quietly. "Of course," Daniel said. "You've been helping people all night. The least I can do is make sure you get home safe." For the first time since the stop began, the older man gave a genuine smile. It wasn't bright or energetic, but it was full of gratitude. It softened the wrinkles on his face, made his eyes warm instead of tired. Before Daniel could step back toward his patrol car, someone down the road shouted faintly from their car, "Hey, what's going on there?" It wasn't an angry shout, just curiosity, but the voice carried. Daniel felt the moment shake a little under the attention. The older man looked toward the sound, then turned back to Daniel. "Are they recording?" he asked quietly. Daniel nodded a little. "I think so." The man looked uncomfortable for a second, not because he had anything to hide, but because his exhaustion made him fragile. Being recorded felt heavy, even when nothing was wrong. "Don't worry," Daniel said softly. "Just focus on getting home." "What?" The man nodded. Daniel walked back to his car and clicked on his radio, letting dispatch know he would be escorting a driver home due to fatigue. It wasn't something he reported often, but he believed in being clear as he spoke. He watched the older man adjust his seat, blink himself awake again, and prepare for the short drive. The whole scene felt slow, gentle, almost fragile, like a moment that needed to be handled with care. A few more cars slowed to watch. More people held up their phones, but none of them understood the quiet truth of the situation. They didn't see the exhaustion of a man who had given the whole night to helping others. They didn't hear the softness in his voice, or the sincerity behind his words. All they saw was an officer standing by a car. All they expected was conflict, but this moment wasn't about conflict. This moment was about two strangers, one tired from giving, the other determined to protect. Daniel stepped out again. "Standing beside the silver car? Whenever you're ready," he said. The older man nodded and started the engine. It hummed quietly, steady enough. Daniel walked back to his patrol car, feeling the weight of the phone still recording. It didn't matter. What mattered was making sure the man in the silver car reached his front door without drifting off the road. What Daniel didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the recording people had taken would soon be shared, viewed, and talked about by thousands of strangers. Not because of drama, not because of conflict, but because kindness, when captured unexpectedly, has a way of reaching far beyond. The moment it was born in the world was about to see a side of this small roadside stop that neither man had imagined. The sun rose a little higher as the silver car eased back onto the road, moving slowly and carefully. The older man kept both hands steady on the wheel, blinking often to keep his eyes from getting too heavy. Behind him, Officer Daniel pulled out as well, leaving a safe but close distance between them. His patrol car's lights were no longer flashing, but his attention remained sharp, fully focused on the car ahead. The road was quiet, with long stretches of open space and soft morning colors fading into the sky. If someone had passed by at that moment without knowing what was happening, they would have seen nothing more than an older man driving home and a police officer following him. But to both men, the moment carried weight, each for different reasons. Inside the silver car, the older man tried to steady his breathing. He wasn't frightened, but he felt a strange mix of relief and discomfort. Relief because someone cared enough to make sure he reached home safely. Discomfort because he wasn't used to anyone watching over him. For years he had been the one doing the watching over people struggling. Over cold nights, over long days filled with needs that never seemed to end. He glanced at the rear view mirror and saw Daniel's car staying close behind, never pushing him, never rushing him. It felt unusual, almost too gentle for what most people expected from roadside stops. A part of him wondered what the people recording earlier would think once they realized what was really happening. Maybe they would understand that not every stop was filled with tension. Maybe they would learn that sometimes a moment of kindness existed quietly behind the scenes, unseen unless you looked closely. Meanwhile, Daniel kept his eyes steady on the silver car. He noticed every small movement, the slight drift when the man blinked longer than usual, the way the car slowed a bit on turns, the soft correction of the wheel each time the car tried to wander. None of it was dangerous now, but it told the story of how tired the man truly was. Daniel gently tapped the steering wheel with his thumb, a quiet habit he did whenever he felt focused. The morning was peaceful, but his mind kept returning to the shelter. He had driven past it many times, seen its small entrance, the warm lights inside on cold nights. He always assumed it was run by a team, people working in shifts. He never imagined that the person leading it was the very man he had just pulled over. He thought about how few people knew the kind of effort that went into keeping a shelter alive. The long nights, the endless work, the constant flow of people needing help. It wasn't the kind of effort that got attention or praise. It was quiet, steady work done by someone who didn't expect anything in return. Daniel wondered how long the man had been doing it. Years, maybe decades. The thought made him feel a quiet respect. After a few minutes, the road curved gently toward a neighborhood filled with older houses. Large trees lined the sidewalks, their branches hanging low with leaves that rustled gently in the breeze. The silver car slowed as it approached a small street, one with cracked pavement and uneven edges. The man's turn signal blinked softly, and he turned down the street. Daniel followed. The houses here looked humble but cared for. A few had flowers in small gardens. Others had wind chimes that swayed lightly. The silver car stopped in front of a small one-story home with fading paint but a warm, inviting feel. A wooden ramp led to the front door, and 2 garden chairs sat on the porch, placed side by side. The man parked and let out a long, quiet breath. Daniel pulled in behind him and stepped out of his patrol car as Daniel approached. The older man pushed his door open slowly and stepped out with a bit of effort. His body looked stiff, worn from the long night. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'm sorry to be a bother." Daniel shook his head immediately. "You're not a bother," he said. "You've been taking care of people all night. Making sure you get home safe is the least I can do." The man smiled again, gentle and tired. "Would you like to come inside for a moment?" he asked. "I have water. Be tea if you want." Daniel wasn't expecting the invitation, but he appreciated it. He knew he couldn't stay long, but he didn't want to refuse either. "Just for a minute," he said with a nod. The man walked slowly toward the porch, holding the railing as he climbed the ramp. Daniel followed, noticing how the house seemed quiet, but full of small touches that suggested kindness. Lived Hera. Potted plant by the door, a welcome mat with a pattern of leaves, a small shelf with neatly arranged shoes. Once inside, the house smelled faintly of tea and old books. The living room was small but warm, with a comfortable-looking sofa and 2 lamps casting soft light. A stack of blankets sat folded neatly in a corner, as if ready to be taken to the shelter at any moment. "You can sit," the man said gently, motioning to the sofa. Daniel sat, easing into the soft cushion. The man disappeared into the kitchen for a moment before returning with 2 glasses of water. He handed one to Daniel and sat across from him, sinking into the chair with a long exhale. "I hope I didn't cause you trouble on the road," the man said. "Not at all," Daniel replied. "I'm glad I stopped you when I did. You were really tired." The man nodded slowly. "You're right. I just didn't realize how much the night took out of me." Daniel took a sip of water before speaking again. "Can I ask how long you've been running the shelter?" The older man looked down at the glass in his hands. "About 17 years, he said softly. "It started small, just a room with a heater and a few blankets. People came quietly, mostly at night. Over time, more came, some nights too many. But we never turned anyone away." Daniel felt something settle in his chest. 17 years. 17 years of long nights, of giving warmth to people with nowhere else to go. "That's a lot of work to do alone," Daniel said. The man smiled faintly. "I'm not alone. People help when they can. But yes, most nights it's just me." They sat quietly for a moment, letting the stillness of the house fill the space between them. Daniel cleared his throat gently. "You know," he said, "people recorded the stop earlier. I'm not sure what they'll do with the footage, but sometimes things online spread fast." The man's shoulders tensed a little. "I don't want attention," he said softly. "I'm not doing anything special. I don't like the idea of being recorded." Daniel understood. "I get that," he said. "But people usually expect drama when they record. They'll be surprised when they see what actually happened." The man looked uncertain. "Surprised how?" he asked. Daniel gave a small shrug. "They'll see kindness instead of conflict." The older man's expression softened, though his eyes still looked concerned. "I hope that's enough," he said. "I'm not fond of being in the center of anything." Daniel took another sip of water. "I understand. But sometimes good things get noticed too." The man nodded, though he didn't seem fully convinced. The two sat quietly again, each lost in thought. Daniel looked around the room, noticing the pictures on a small shelf. They weren't family photos. They were pictures of people smiling, wrapped in blankets, holding cups of warm soup. People of all ages, all backgrounds. People who had been helped on cold nights. "They're not relatives," the man said quietly, noticing Daniel's gaze. "They're people from the shelter. Those photos remind me why the work matters." Daniel nodded. "It matters a lot." After a while, Daniel checked the time. His shift wasn't over yet, and he still had to return to his patrol route. "I should get going," he said as he stood. The older man also rose slowly, steadying himself on the arm of his chair. "Thank you again," he said softly, "for making sure I got home." Daniel gave him a small, sincere smile. "Anytime." They walked to the door together. Daniel stepped outside first, feeling the cool morning air hit his face again. The neighborhood was still quiet, with only a few birds beginning to chirp. "Get some rest," Daniel said as he stepped off the porch. The older man nodded. "I will, and take care out there." Daniel walked to his patrol car, giving the man one last nod before getting in. As he started the engine, he glanced back at the small house. The man was standing on the porch, one hand resting on the railing, watching as Daniel drove away. The road back to the main street felt different now. The morning seemed brighter, but quieter in a meaningful way. Daniel followed the route he had taken earlier, passing the same trees, the same open stretches of road. As he drove, his thoughts lingered on the man he had just left. He wondered how many people had been helped over the years, how many warm meals had been served, how many lives had been touched by a man who expected nothing in return. He also wondered how many people recording earlier would understand the story behind that simple roadside stop. By the time Daniel reached the main stretch again, his radio crackled softly. "Unit 12. Checking in." Daniel picked up the device. "This is 12. I'm back en route. Copy that." He placed the radio back and let out a quiet exhale. He had no idea what would happen with the recordings. He assumed people might post them online, maybe share them for a short moment before moving on. He didn't expect the footage to spread beyond a few hundred views. But as the day went on, something unexpected was already starting. Somewhere else in town, a person who had filmed part of the stop uploaded the video to social media with a simple caption, "Not what I expected to see this morning." Within an hour, people began to comment. Within 3 hours, people began to share. And by the time the sun reached its peak, the video had already started spreading farther than anyone had anticipated. A quiet moment that neither Daniel nor the older man had thought much about was beginning to leave the small town, carried not by conflict but by kindness. But neither of them knew that yet. They were simply living their day, unaware they were becoming part of a story that the world would soon come to know. The rest of the night slowly faded behind them as the officer stood there beside the car, trying to take in everything the man had just shared. It felt like the air around them softened, as if the tension that had been building earlier had finally decided to let go. He didn't rush to speak or to fill the quiet. He wanted the man to feel seen, not judged, and that silence gave both of them a moment to breathe. The man leaned back in his seat, almost sinking into it, the exhaustion becoming more visible now that the truth was out. The dim glow of the streetlights fell over his face, showing lines of tiredness that were not just from that night, but from years of giving more than he ever received. The officer noticed the small tremble in his hands, not from fear anymore, but from pure fatigue. Even then, the man still tried to keep a soft smile. The kind of smile someone wears when they are used to putting others first. The officer cleared his throat gently and asked him if he had eaten anything since yesterday. The man shook his head slowly. He had been working for hours and never stopped long enough to think about himself. There were people who needed shelter, people who were cold and hungry, and he had given every part of his night to them. The officer closed his notebook, realizing that there was no need for more questions. He had all the answers he needed. He walked back to his patrol car, not to check anything, but simply to give himself a moment. He let out a long breath as he sat down. It wasn't often that duty put him face to face with someone who reminded him of the goodness that still existed in the world. He pressed his forehead lightly against the steering wheel, thinking about how easily the night could have gone differently if he had assumed the worst instead of listening. A small wave of gratitude washed over him, gratitude that he had taken the time to pause. When he returned to the man's window, his tone was softer, almost gentle. He told him that he appreciated everything he had done that night. The man looked surprised, as if kindness from a stranger was something he wasn't used to receiving. The officer assured him that he wasn't in any trouble, and that all he really needed was rest. He suggested that he should not be driving anymore in such a tired state. The man agreed. The officer then offered to help him get home safely. At first, the man hesitated, didn't want to be a burden to anyone, but the officer insisted, telling him that looking out for someone like him wasn't a burden at all. It felt more like a responsibility he genuinely wanted to take on. With a small nod, the man accepted. The officer radioed in, explaining that he would be escorting a driver home for safety reasons. There was no need to mention the details. Some stories didn't need to be told through official channels. Some stories were better held quietly in the heart. They started their slow drive through the empty streets. The city lights flickered through the windows as they moved, creating soft reflections on the car's dashboard. The man led the way in his car, driving carefully, while the officer followed behind with steady patience. Every turn, every stop, the officer stayed close enough to make sure nothing went wrong. Sometimes, simple gestures could make a person feel protected, and tonight, that was all he wanted to do. When they reached the man's home, a small but tidy place in a quiet neighborhood, the officer stepped out of his car. He walked up to him as the man got out, moving slowly as if every step carried the weight of the night. The street was calm, with only the sound of distant leaves rustling in the breeze. The man thanked him, not once, but several times. His voice cracked slightly, not from sadness, but from relief. It had been a long time since anyone had gone out of their way for him. The officer gently told him that he didn't have to thank him. Anyone in his position would have done the same. But the man smiled faintly, knowing deep down that not everyone would. As they spoke, the man's neighbor stepped outside for a moment, curious about the patrol car parked on the street. She recognized the man immediately and waved with concern. The officer reassured her quickly, telling her that everything was fine and that he just wanted to make sure her neighbor got home safely. She nodded with a soft look of gratitude and went back inside. The man stood quietly for a moment, looking at his home with a tired but warm expression. He told the officer that the shelter he ran had been his life's work for years, and that nights like this one reminded him why he kept doing it, even when it became hard. The officer listened carefully, letting the words sink into the space between them. He admired the man's dedication and the quiet strength he carried. Before leaving, the officer asked him to promise one thing, that before taking care of everyone else again, he would take care of himself first. The man chuckled softly, agreeing with a sincere nod. He appreciated the concern more than he could put into words. The officer walked back to his patrol car, glancing over his shoulder one last time. The man waved lightly at him before heading inside. His steps were slow, but now they carried a sense of peace instead of strain. Driving away, the officer felt something shift inside him. The night had started like any other, but now it felt different. It reminded him that beneath uniforms, beyond rules and outside expectations, everyone had a story, one that deserved patience and understanding. He felt grateful for the brief moment where two lives crossed in a way neither expected. The rest of his shift was quieter. He patrolled the streets with a clearer mind, carrying the warmth from that interaction with him. Sometimes a single human moment could wash away days of stress. He didn't know yet that the video recorded by bystanders had already started spreading online. He didn't know that people were talking about his calm approach and the man's quiet dedication. All he knew was that he had done what felt right. Hours later, when the sky began to lighten and the early morning air carried the first signs of dawn, the officer finally parked his car and ended his shift. He sat there for a moment before stepping out, feeling a sense of peace that didn't come around often. He stretched his arms and looked at the soft morning light spreading across the horizon. The world felt a little different, a little kinder, as if that single interaction had added something meaningful to it. He locked his car, took a long breath of the cool air, and walked toward the station, ready to end the night and head home. He had no idea that the story was just beginning to reach the world. But even if he didn't know it yet, that night had left a mark on him, on the man he helped, and soon on countless strangers who would watch the moment unfold on their screens. The morning sun slowly rose over the city, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pale yellow. It was the kind of sunrise that made everything look calm and gentle, even the streets that were usually busy with noise. Inside his small home, the officer finally sat down with a warm cup of coffee. His shift had ended only an hour earlier, but his mind was still replaying the events of the night. He didn't feel tired the way he normally did after a long shift. Instead, he felt something lighter inside him, like the weight he carried every day as part of his job had shifted a little. He rubbed his eyes and leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet of the morning settle into his chest. He thought about the man he had helped. The exhaustion in his eyes, the quiet strength in his voice. He wondered if the man was still asleep, finally resting after a long night of serving others. The officer hoped so. He hoped the man was wrapped comfortably in blankets, getting the rest he had ignored for hours. The officer finished his coffee and took a long breath. He didn't know what the day would bring, but he felt grateful that he had ended the night the way he did. Sometimes the smallest moments had the biggest impact. Across the city, phones buzzed, screens lit up, and notifications chimed. A video had started circulating online. It showed the beginning of the traffic stop, the tension, the nervousness, the curiosity of the people standing nearby. Then it captured the shift in the officer's tone, the calmness, the patience. The moment he realized the truth about the man he had stopped, people shared the video with captions like, "This is how kindness should look, and not every story ends in anger." No one expected the clip to spread as fast as it did. Comment sections filled with messages praising both men. Strangers wrote about how refreshing it felt to see understanding instead of conflict. By midday, the video had spread far beyond the city. It reached news feeds in other states, even other countries. It reached people who had never met the officer or the man, but who felt moved by the simple interaction. When the officer finally woke again in the afternoon, his phone was full of messages. His colleague had texted him a link to the video, adding a short message, "You're trending. Call me." The officer stared at the message for a long moment, unsure what to think. He opened the video, watching himself on the screen from the angle of a bystander's phone. He paid attention to the small details, the way he spoke, the way he lowered his voice when the man explained the truth, the way he chose compassion over judgment. Seeing himself from the outside felt strange. He had simply done what he believed was right, nothing more. Moments later, his phone rang. It was his supervisor. The officer's heart raced a little as he answered, unsure of the tone he would hear, but the voice on the other end sounded warm, almost proud. "I saw the video," the supervisor said. "You handled everything well. The department appreciates you." The officer let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He thanked his supervisor quietly, still feeling unsure how to react. Compliments weren't something he heard often in his line of work. The call ended, but the warmth of the words stayed with him. Later that day, he decided to step outside for a walk. He needed some air and room to clear his mind. As he walked through his neighborhood, a few people recognized him from the video. Some nodded politely. Others stopped him to say something kind. One older man from the neighborhood gently placed a hand on his shoulder and told him, "You reminded people that good still exists." The officer didn't know how to respond, so he simply smiled and thanked him. Meanwhile, the man he had escorted home the night before slept peacefully for hours, deeper than he had slept in a long time. When he finally woke up, the sunlight was already bright outside his window. He stretched slowly, feeling the weight of exhaustion finally lighten. He made himself a simple breakfast and sat by his kitchen table. His phone vibrated with several unread messages. Friends, volunteers, neighbors, they were all sending him the same video link. He clicked on it with confusion. As he watched the recording, he felt a surprising mix of emotions. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. His work at the shelter had always been quiet, done without cameras, without recognition. But seeing the video, he felt something warm grow inside him. Not because of the attention, but because the moment captured showed something true. It showed the value of listening, the power of kindness, the impact of understanding. A few minutes later, his phone rang. It was one of the volunteers from the shelter. She sounded excited, almost breathless. She told him that donations had started pouring in since the video went viral. People wanted to help. They wanted to support the shelter. The man sat in silence, overwhelmed by the news. For years, he had struggled to keep the shelter running. He had stretched every dollar, every resource, and sometimes he had felt alone in the fight. Now, strangers were reaching out, wanting to stand beside him. After ending the call, he placed his hands on the table and closed his eyes for a moment. Gratitude washed over him slowly, like a warm wave. He decided he wanted to thank the officer personally. He didn't want the moment between them to be lost in the noise of the internet. So later that evening, he drove to the station. When he walked through the doors, a few officers recognized him from the video, smiling politely. The man asked to see the officer, and after a short wait, he stepped out from a hallway, surprised to see him standing there. They greeted each other warmly. Neither of them felt awkward. It was as if the moment they shared had built a quiet connection between them. The man thanked him again, not just for the safe escort home, but for treating him with patience before knowing who he was. The officer smiled and told him that compassion shouldn't depend on status. "Everyone deserves respect," he said softly. The man nodded. Appreciating the sincerity in his voice, they talked for several minutes, sharing thoughts about the shelter, the people who relied on it, and the sudden wave of support pouring in from strangers. The officer offered to volunteer when he could, something he had never done before but felt inspired to try. The man's face brightened at the idea. He told him that help was always welcome, especially from someone who carried understanding in his heart as they parted ways. Both felt something meaningful had been exchanged, something far deeper than what the video had shown. Over the next few days, the shelter saw an increase in donations, food deliveries, and even new volunteers. People from nearby communities came forward wanting to help. The man worked tirelessly to organize everything, but this time he didn't feel overwhelmed. This time, he felt supported. The officer visited the shelter on his day off. When he walked through the doors, the volunteers greeted him warmly. Some recognized him from the video, but they treated him like a person. Not a trend, he helped set up tables, served meals, and spoke with people who came seeking warmth. Every face he saw reminded him of the man he had stopped that night, of the resilience and kindness hidden behind tired eyes. As the day went on, he realized how much that single moment had changed him. It had opened his heart in ways he didn't expect. Weeks passed. The noise around the video eventually softened, as all viral moments do. But the bond between the officer and the man remained. They stayed in touch, checking on each other occasionally. The officer helped whenever he could. The man continued leading the shelter with the same quiet dedication he always had. One evening, the officer visited the shelter after his shift. The man greeted him with a warm handshake and led him inside. The room was filled with people eating, talking softly, finding comfort. The officer looked around and felt something settle in his heart. He realized that this room, these people, this connection was the real outcome of that night. Not the video, not the comments, not the praise. It was the reminder that kindness could ripple outward, touching lives they would never meet. The man placed a hand on the officer's shoulder and said quietly, "Sometimes the world needs a little light." That night we shared a small piece of it. Officer smiled, his chest warm with gratitude, and in that small, humble shelter, surrounded by strangers and stories, the two men stood there, connected by a moment that neither of them had planned, but both of them had needed. The world kept moving outside, busy and loud as always. But inside that room, the simple truth remained clear. One gentle act could change everything.